Is the meta turning? Are the walls burning? Is everyone forced to move over while aggro performs a takeover?
It only flops if it hops. Comment below as we walk through the Week 6 recap of Bloomborough Standard. Alrighty folks, this week we analyzed results from 6 major tournaments, giving us 48 top 8 slots to sift through and parse for data. Now, Max, from those 6 tournaments, Dimir Aggro emerged at the top with 6 top 8s of its own and 2 trophies.
Whew. Next on the Tier 1 list was Domain with 4 top 8 slots and a trophy of its own.
Coming in third was the classic Orzhov Midrange build, snagging 6 top 8 slots while climbing back into Tier 1 land.
Rakdos Lizards held strong with 5 top 8 slots, though it couldn't quite secure a trophy.
And Gruul Slickshot closes out our Tier 1 lists with 5 top 8 slots of its own, though again, no trophy.
Whew. And in Tier 2, we start with Golgari Talent, snagging 4 top 8 slots as the archetype continues to adjust in the face of increasing hate for enchantments.
Now, in our past Brewer's Corners, we covered various Reanimator builds, and at long last, Max, one has emerged to climb into Tier 2, giving us another combo deck to add into the testing pool as it grabbed 2 top 8 slots, but most importantly, a trophy.
Oh, that's exciting. And Azorius Mentor has similarly found its footing finally, with a couple top 8 slots allowing it back onto the tier list.
Last but not least, the final Tier 2 spot goes to Jeskai Convoke, which, frankly, it's dead even with Boros Convoke. Each grabbed a couple top 8 spots.
Yep, so we'll be analyzing those together, and over in Brewer's Corner, I'll be covering Rakdos Slickshot and Mono White Infect.
And I'll highlight Golgari Analyst and Niv Mizzet Control.
But now, onto our Tier 1 archetype breakdowns, starting with Dimir Aggro.
So, Linden43 won Friday's 55-player MTGO challenge by taking down the Mirror in the finals. So let's look at how this archetype evolved. Now, first and foremost, we got Mockingbird. I love that we're starting to see this emerge in Dimir. I've been waiting to see if this was going to make the call, and like you can see it right here over 2 of the Spyglass Siren spots. Perfect. Also, Max, I believe this is one of your pet cards from way back in the day. Kaido Dancing Shadow is in the sideboard. I love it. Like, we've finally gone full tilt on the meta, obstinate Bailoffs everywhere, people stopped playing Lily of the Veil, now we got Kaidos coming in. This is spicy. Love where we're at on that. Let's also note there's a playset of Tidebinders sitting in the 75, though it's a 2-2 split between the sideboard and the main board. And I love that we have the 2 Aclizots sitting in the sideboard. I think it really shows that this build is ready to grind with Golgari, it's ready to grind with the Mirror, because Aclizots is one of those must-answer but sticky threats that just, it's rough. If you don't answer it, it takes over the game in about a turn or 2, and having 2 of them means you're probably going to see one.
Yeah, no doubt. That has also become a pet card of mine, but I'm very excited to see Kaido. And speaking of, what matchups would you say are the best to slide him in for? How do we best utilize Kaido?
Well, I think Kaido is there for the grind as well. It has some cute synergies. I do love that you're able to utilize that passive so that you can return Mockingbirds to your hand and then reshape them into something else. Same goes for using it to flip back Urtais, flip back Tidebinders. Like, there is a lot of utility in the way that this build goes. So I think it's there for the grind, and I expect to see a fair amount of grind because we're at that stage where aggro has been in the limelight for many weeks. Domain has been slowly creeping back in, but that means that mid-range decks are coming back. Because if mid-range is coming to dominate aggro, that's when Domain starts to creep in. So I think we're there, where those mid-range mirrors with Dimir, with Golgari are just popping up, and it's got to be able to be something you grind through.
Definitely, we're going to be seeing cards that are just there for the grind. I mean, that's going to be a constant theme today. Speaking of which, let's talk about 5-color Domain.
Sendoiche took a classic Domain build through Saturday's 46-player MTGO challenge, emerging victorious over Rakdos Lizards in the end. So let's look at why. Now, the main board, it's not original, folks. Yet again, we see a main board that has stuck the landing, and it's been this way for a couple of weeks now. But you go over to the sideboard, and let's look over here. Beza is a 3 of. Like, we've finally gotten to the point where Bailoffs are starting to fall off as the Lilies fall off, and Beza's there. Which makes a lot of sense, because what you really want to do, like they did in the mirror, or not the mirror, the finals matchup against Rakdos Lizards, is the ability to go turn 3 lockdown into turn 4 Beza once they refill the board. So it really pushes that tempo back at him and says, okay, you can get the early hits in, but we will stabilize. And then when you can go lockdown, Beza, Sunfall, and then maybe an Archangel right at, like, that is an insane thing for aggro to try to deal with. They're not going to get through. So I do think this build capitulates pretty heavily to control, but the format's aggressive right now, and it needs to be able to deal with that aggressiveness.
Yeah, I've also seen, speaking of grinds, I've also seen Nissa there in the main board as a top-end card along with your Herd Migrations, your Atraxes. Is that there just for the artifact enchantment hate, or does it kind of stand on its own as a good top-end card in the deck?
I think it's a fine top-end answer. It's grindy, it's difficult to answer. It's going to do some of the work that you need against like Golgari Analyst, or not Analyst, Golgari Talent, where you just need to blow up those enchantments on impact, right? But again, in the mirror, Nissa is a backbreaker because you have the ability to just go 7 mana in, ult, swing. And all of a sudden, a couple of creatures equals lethal. Especially when you have all these surveil lands that are forests in addition to their other types. It makes that ult incredibly powerful once you hit the mid-game.
I love Nissa myself, one of my favorite cards, and I love to see it be in the main board of Domain. So let's switch over to a mid-range archetype. Let's talk about Orzhov Midrange.
Batutana made it to the finals of Sunday's 49-player MTGO challenge with Orzhov Midrange, the best run this build had all weekend. Now, there is a bit of a tension point when you look at this deck. You'll note that there is Deep Cavern Bat sitting here and Temporary Lockdown sitting here. I don't love the tension point, but I acknowledge that it probably needs to be there because this is not a build that's being aggressive at all. Like, this build has given up all pretense of aggression, and it's saying, we are the best mid-range deck. We are going to outgrind the other mid-range players, and I think the point of this is to be able to outgrind Dimir, to be able to outgrind and push through decks like Golgari Talent. And you see that hedge with like Lauren and the Third Path as a 2-of in the main. Clearly, this build is trying to deal with that. So I think it's saying we're going to take aggro, we're going to eat them for breakfast. We have a very strong grind plan, both pre-board and post-board for those mid-range mirrors, but we're probably just giving up against everything Domain. I do not see this build having a reliable path through Domain. You do not present a quick clock despite all the disruption. So I like the Kayas. They're kind of cute in the sideboard, but that's a far cry from saying it's going to beat Domain on its own.
I think you're right. And that leads me to my question. Do you think there's still a ton of flex slots, a ton of room for evolution in this archetype? What cards could it evolve into, if so?
So I do think that there's a lot of room for evolution when you get to mid-range decks in general, because they're trying to shuffle the answers and the threats, right? They need to figure out where the format is, and to a degree, they're actually able to be tuned at a higher level than even Control, because Control is typically following the dominant strategy of we don't play threats that can be answered, so they don't have as many grindy 3 or 4 drops because they're just trying to land something that's unanswerable at the top end. Whereas mid-range is saying, okay, Preacher's good this week, maybe it's not as good next week. Maybe next week it needs to be Gix and we need to be more aggressive. So I think mid-range decks in particular have the ability to transform based on what they see in the meta, and Orzhov mid-range absolutely could. The question that Orzhov has to answer, and it's not an easy one, is how do I push against aggro without giving up too many points to Domain? You know, you don't want to become the coin flip deck where you're basically just 50-50 against everything. For a long time, that was Jund in Modern, where they're like, it has game against everything. And like, yeah, but everything has game against it. And that's a problem when you're just playing coin flip Magic on margins. You're not going to win every coin flip. Ask anyone who cast Mana Clash when they were a kid, thinking they'd win 20 straight coin flips to win on turn 1. Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen, you know?
Yeah. We've experienced this question when it comes to the Golgari mid-range. You know, a shift week to week based on what's going on in the meta, and the same goes for Orzhov. Orzhov is very flexible in terms of its responses, and so you're going to see that change week to week. So keep an eye on Orzhov from week to week and tune it for your local metas. That's the best advice we can give. But let's talk about a deck that's doing really well, whatever region you're in. Rakdos Lizards.
Alrighty, Rakdos Lizards. So, Tchuko made it to the finals of Saturday's 46-player MTGO challenge with Lizards before getting rolled by Sendeuch's Domain. Let's discuss what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and why. Now, there is in the main board of this a 3-1 split of Thoughtstalker Warlock to Valley Flamecaller. I like that. I like that a lot. And my reasoning on this is that Flamecaller is a huge tempo boost when you get it out, but multiples don't feel good. They just don't. And similarly with Thoughtstalker Warlock, I like seeing the first one. I don't always want to see the second, and I typically don't want to see that third copy, right? So I like where they did that 3-1 split. I think that's clever. Mudflat Village versus Rockface Village, I'm going to be forever the person that's dissenting. It's fine. It's fine. I might be just flat wrong on this one, chat, and feel free to comment below and let me know what you think of that. But personally, I'm on Rockface till I die. Now, outside of that, I do think it's worth noting that by playing that Mudflat Village instead of another Swamp, you are only on 12 untapped black sources for turn 1. That's sub 90% for Duress and cut down on turn 1, which can be critical against a number of matchups. So it's worth noting. And last but not least, the Scales of Shale in the sideboard. I was a doubter until I played against this, like today, with Boros Mouse. Holy crap, is that card good against aggro. That absolutely ruined me like twice. It was something I did not see coming, and effective. Extremely effective. Well played on whoever got that tech in there.
Well played. Speaking of which, things effective against aggro, we're talking about the removal suite in this deck and how it's been shifting week to week, right? We're more on the 2-4 split, cut down, and go for the throat right now. Would you advise more burn-based removal that could double for hitting the player? Long goodbye. Do you think the 2-4 split is correct? What do you think about this suite of removal spells?
I think we're fine with the go for the throats because we're not seeing a ton of cookies lists running around right now. So we're fine with just get it, kill it, done. I don't love cut down. I don't love cut down because there are certain matchups where it's completely dead, like Domain, where the targets it's going to have are extremely similar to Shock typically. There's only a few instances, and really the one that comes to mind is like Warden of the Inner Sky. So I get it. If you're playing up against, Convoke all the time, sure, play the cut downs. But if you don't expect a crap load of Convoke, look at Shock. Seriously, I know it seems basic, but it's reach. It's reach against decks like Domain that you don't get with cut down. And with cut down, you're just sitting there staring at it the whole game like you basically mulligan to 6 to start. Whereas with Shock, you're like, okay, we can at least dump 2 to the face after we've gotten them low. So that personal preference there.
Okay. And speaking of a deck that typically takes advantage of those kinds of burn spells, Gruul Slickshot.
I apologize for butchering this name. Murray Ryuji made it to the finals of the Bloomborough Store Championship in Osaka, Japan on Saturday before losing to Sultai Reanimator. And I like where this build went, okay? We have a 12 mouse package. 12 mice in the house. Love it. Only 2 Slickshot, though. I found that incredibly unusual, especially for like game 1, where I'd normally rather see 2 more Questing Druid sitting in the sideboard and a full playset of Slickshot to emphasize the fact that on game 1, we need to be getting that as almost a free win against a number of archetypes that are going to sideboard in all the Bezas, all the temporary lockdowns. Like, we need to have those free wins built into the deck, and I don't know that we need all the grind in the world for game 1. I want the tempo. So I don't love that. The 3 Witchstalker Frenzy in the main tells me that we are seeing a rise in all of the mid-range decks. Like, we need answers to Preachers, Shellys, Glissas, Zoralines. That's what Witchstalker says to me, because you don't run it if you don't expect to see a bunch of 5-butt creatures that you have to kill on impact, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of Question Drake, what's the verdict on that card? Is the card valuable enough to warrant 2 main board slots and 2 sideboard slots, or would you rather just see this in the sideboard?
Personally, I'd rather see it in the sideboard. But it's a question, again, when you get to these Slickshot decks and they're starting to incorporate the mouse package, it's going to become a question of does the mouse package even need Slickshot? And if not, then you don't need to go into green and do Gruul. You can just go into like Boros Mice. You can go into just mono red, right? And mono red still has Ren's Resolve, which I get that it's like kind of a poor mockery of Questing Druid, but at the same time, you also have consistent mana by going that route, so it might be worthwhile. Regardless, I don't know that Gruul Slickshot is the way to go, but if you're going to go that route, I'm putting the Questing Druids in the sideboard.
Okay, y'all heard it here. Later on, we're going to be talking about this archetype in particular, whether it needs to shift to another color or not, so stay tuned. But for now, we're going to jump on down to Tier 2, and I'll start things off with Golgari Talent. UVO4 smashed through to the semifinals of Sunday's Super RCQ at SCGCon Tampa with Golgari Talent. And no surprise, this deck is out and about. It's a very popular list, and I like where it's positioned. We've got, of course, 2 duress, 3 cut downs in your turn 1, your 1-drop slot. I think that earlier interaction is critical. I think the duress is critical. I at least have 1 copy of my own version of Golgari. With 2, you're looking to protect against certain things that are coming your way. We're seeing the introduction of Assassin's Trophy. When this card released, I was tinkering with it, thinking about it, and back then, I think in the early meta when this card came out, it wasn't as advantageous as it would be now. But there are plenty of permanents, especially enchantments. There are artifacts out there. There are other things that you really just don't mind trading and giving them a basic land for. So in a lot of cases, I think more often than not, this card is going to be useful. So 1 copy to tinker with. We've got 1 Virtue, 1 Flesh Gorger on the top end. I like where the Flesh Gorger is positioned. You want to have that life gain, especially in light of all the aggro that's coming at you.
Yeah, and I mean, with all the go for the throats running around and lizards and everything else, it feels real good to have a 3/3 lifelinker they can't touch. So I get where you're going with that, my man. Now, does this deck sideboard need to include some more graveyard hate? Now that we're seeing like Reanimator, Mentor decks, they're all coming back. Do we need more grave hate?
I believe it does. You could go with the Keen Curator, and that does provide a potential really strong potential 2-drop creature, 3/3 body, right? And as I've said before in the past, that +4/+4 happens more often than not. It's pretty easy to get that +4/+4 when you're facing off against specific decks using a variety of permanents, a variety of card types. But you could also just go with the Frillback and continue with that. I think the advantage with the Frillback, of course, it's not as strong of a body for your mana, but you do get to exile the whole graveyard. And in some cases, that's going to be what you want to do rather than just picking and choosing 1 or 2 cards. But for me personally, I side with the Curator. I love that card. I like the +4/+4 potential on it.
Fair. So it might be that you want the Curator, it might be that you want the Frillback, but honestly, it might be that you just need both.
Yeah.
Fair. And with that, we're going to move on to the reason you're probably going to need these cards, Sultai Reanimator.
Let's go. A Sultai Reanimator list making it into the tier list. And I've been bumping into this one on ladder lately, so maybe it's surging. We got Kageki Kento, who took down the 61-player Bloomborough Store Championship in Osaka, Japan this past Saturday with this deck. Once you pause to take this Reanimator list actually into top 8s and reminding us that we really do ignore our opponent's graveyard to our own peril. We've got the 1 Seed of Hope, 2 Flood Maws, and 2 Cut Downs as your turn 1 cards. Early interaction, early way, Seed of Hope especially is an early way to flip self-mill. Early self-mill with Picklock Prankster, Whale of the Forgotten, and the Philology Archaeologist, leading into Founding of the 3rd Path. You can also self-mill the Jace. So there's plenty of ways in the early game to self-mill, to turn over cards. And of course, our payoff here is Squirming Emergence. Squirming Emergence-based Reanimator game plan is really easy to pull off in the first 3 turns with all this self-mill. A lot quicker than your other standard Rakdos Cruel Claw Reanimators or your black-based Reanimators with Cruelty of Gix. Our targets, of course, are the 3 Atraxas, the 3 Lumras. I love the Lumra, and the 1 Harvester of Misery. Notably giving you some relief from aggro if that's your target, the Harvester of Misery.
Yeah, I love that payoff with Lumra just saying, all right, we've milled a ton of cards, let's grab all the lands. Now we're like a ramp deck that went bigger than Domain on mana. It's kind of wild in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah. I look at a list like this, Max, and I think, what is it that makes this list stronger than previous Reanimator attempts? Because we have seen so many versions of Reanimator, hit for a week and fail. Why would this one possibly stick?
So I'm going to say that while most Reanimator lists, like the Cruel Claw-based ones that you're starting to see, they can go off on turn 3 with the right combination of cards, but most likely they go off on turn 4, if at all. Reanimating with Cruelty of Gix on turn 5 or some other spells which are traditionally on turn 5 is what you want to do with those other decks. This list has the potential to go off by turn 3 and fetch you an Atraxa. And that's not anything to sneeze at. It also houses a good suite of protection from aggro in the first few turns, getting you there with, helping you with Terror Tide, Enter the Flood Maul, bouncing the creatures, Harvester of Misery. So it's got some little spot check answers to aggro that make it survive just a little bit longer than your standard Reanimator list, which typically you're sitting there the first 4 turns and you're getting hit. And this deck doesn't just allow you to get hit. So I think this has a slight advantage over those lists, and that's why we're seeing it on the tier list now.
Better speed bumps, faster payoffs. I feel you. I feel you. Now, moving on to the other deck that is utilizing all of the graveyard fun, let's talk about Azorius Mentor.
And we warned that this was going to happen, that this is going to be a graveyard fall. And we've got another graveyard-based list. Sakano Rei managed to top 8 Saturday's Bloomburrow Store Championship in Osaka, Japan with this list. Like I said, the lack of graveyard hate means this list is actually back on the tier, and you're not just seeing it on Arena anymore. We've got 4 Helping Hand to revive our targets, which are 4 Haughty Djinn and 4 Monastery Mentors. That's old news. We already know that that's what this deck wants to do. The new tech is the Soul Partition, plus all the counter spells that you have in the list. You've got 3 Phantom Interference, 2 3 steps ahead. That's your counter spell suite. We've also got 3 Temporary Lockdown and 2 Sunfalls in the sideboard to really come in against aggro if you need to. And I also want to point to the 2 Flankers, which really help you out in the mirror. That's your graveyard hate for the mirror if you want, that are also in the sideboard. So I like where this deck is positioned. Y'all need to just put more graveyard hate in your decks, because this deck is going to stick around if you don't.
Fair. It may not be spooky season yet, but we got Reanimator lists aplenty. So, speaking of dealing with the graveyard, trying to protect your permanents, Soul Partition, why are we playing that in this list over Get Lost?
So I think it's a tempo solution. You really just want to tempo your opponent until you get to the point where you can start doing things with Monastery Mentor, Haughty Djinn. And it removes the hurdle without giving your opponent access to map tokens. And aggro decks love those map tokens. They take advantage of that. Even the mid-range lists right now are. So it's a decent tempo solution. It also has the versatility of allowing you to target your own creatures without having to pay that tax if you have to. So that's also there as well.
Fair. And finally, on tier 2, we've got Jeskai Convoke. Let's talk a little bit about it.
All right, Jeskai Convoke. Casa made it to the top 8 of Saturday's 46-player MTGO challenge with Jeskai Convoke. In this list, first, let's talk about the 3-drop slot, because this is where there are a lot of variables. We're seeing this time 3 copies of War Leader's Call. I love that card where it's positioned right now. You need that boost to really get over the mid-range list. And we've also got 2 copies of Sanguine Evangelist in that 3-drop slot as well. For now, this seems correct. I like this combination. Notably, though, you're not putting any copies of Get Lost or Destroy Evil in the main board. We are seeing 1 of each in the sideboard. I think those cards are still pretty critical to get rid of the enchantments that are ever present in the meta, but that's just my point on that. 4 Sirens, 1 Yodian Frontliner in your flex slot there. Very straightforward aggro list compared to your Prowess and Mouse decks that are becoming very popular. I can see why you would still want to play Convoke. Notably, we've got some protection for splashing blue, protect the negotiators in the sideboard. That's a solution to a lot of lists that are just ready to Sunfall you, ready to temporary lockdown you. So maybe we traded some of that enchantment hate for the counter spells.
I mean, this build is very aggressive in game 1, and it doesn't play much of that enchantment hate, like you said. I don't know if that's going to burn you if people are mainboarding temporary lockdowns, but I see where the gamble was made. We'll put it that way. It was definitely a gamble.
Yeah.
So I look at, this list. We've looked at Slickshot, Lizards. How much hate is Convoke getting just because there's other viable aggro archetypes? Like, how much splash hate does it get from that?
Wow, yeah, Temporary Lockdown is just a very high stock, high value card right now, right? I mean, it's hitting 4 decks in the top 2 tiers. So I think this deck is still unfortunately weak to Lockdown, especially with the fact that we just mentioned you don't have Destroy Evil or Get Lost in the main board. Typically, it's also weak to other board wipes like Sunfall, and this explains the Splash for Blue. I used to think, they need that turn 1 artifact, but the Splash for Blue is also there for counter spells in the sideboard. Typically before that, the question was if Gleeful, Demolition, your Knight Errant combo can reload your hand enough to rebuild in case of a board wipe, and that's what I traditionally used to do playing Boros. But, if the mana is correct, that can happen more often than not. But I like hedging bets with the Splash for Blue and the counter spells. That should really help this deck out a lot.
And considering one of the traditional ways that Convoke falls is, getting hit with Wrath Effect after Wrath Effect, subsequent Wrath Effects, having Protect the Negotiator seems pretty spicy to deal with that. So I see where the appeal is there. But with that, we are going to wrap up the tier list, move on, favorite segment every week, Brewer's Corner. Let's kick things off with a little Golgari Analyst. Alrighty, folks. So credit to House of Mana MTG, top 8'd with this list in the 49-player MTGO challenge on Sunday, so you know it's legit. You know this isn't just somebody tinkering around. This thing has made it into the top 8 of a major tournament. Now, because it's spooky season, Terror-Tide it is. Alright, love it. We've got 4 copies in the 75. So this build in particular, I don't know that you have a ton of game against all the aggro decks on game 1. That's really where you see those extra cutdowns, go for the throats and Terror-Tides. And let's not forget how good Titania is against aggro if it sticks the landing, especially in a deck like this where you're constantly putting lands into the graveyard, right? But what this is, in essence, is a revamped version of the old Golgari Analyst, or the old Analyst list that were Temur, saying, let's go into Golgari, let's play the Pitiless Carnage Lumra combo, let's acknowledge that Nissa can get you Lumras, and then let's have our win con be this innocuous little 1-2. And oh, by the way, let's say they kill all of them, use that Mudflat Village that comes back with Lumra and just pull it right back into your hand. That was super clever tech. I love that they put a copy of that in.
That's spicy. The Analyst list used to give me a lot of trouble, so it's a little disheartening to see it come back in Golgari colors, but I'm interested to try it myself and just see what it's all about. And let's move on over now to the next list in our Brewer's Corner, Rakdos Slickshot. So credit to Hamuda, a top 8 player in a 55-player MTGO challenge on Friday. So you know this list is good as well. It's tested. And look at that low curve. Gotta love that low curve. I have to ask the question, 12 mice in 12 mouse in the house, right? But is that enough for Might of the Meek? I don't know if we do a full set of Might of the Meek. Maybe 2. I don't know. I just have to question that. I do see the appeal of the 2 copies of Moran Banesplitter. You can re-equip this later. It triggers Valiant. It triggers Prowess. So equipments are, pretty good as non-creature spells in these lists. I think a 2 of is perfect. Going Rakdos means you get to cast Sellsword. This means you have another way to fling as well. So you don't just have to depend on your opponent killing the Heartfire hero. You can use the Sellsword. We've got 3 copies of Rockface Village. Singing that land's praises. I like where that one is positioned. It triggers Valiant. It triggers Prowess. It makes things hasty. And then I also want to point to the 2 Obliterating Bolts in the sideboard. Y'all pay attention to that card because that's your answer to the pesky Aclazotses and Preachers that you're seeing in black-based lists right now.
Yeah, I mean, that list is basically mono red with a very light black splash, and I'm here for it because this was, like we talked about with Gruul Slickshot, similar scenario, like how many Slickshots do you want? How many mice do you want? This is where all those little combo decks are going, like all the Prowess builds are trying to decide which build of that is correct. But on a completely separate side of the spectrum, let's take a look at Niv Mizzet Control. So credit to Harikonnen for tossing this our way. Appreciate you, bud. This list is spicy. I thought, honest to God, that this was going to get rolled by aggro because it has just so many Surveil lands, and it's kind of slow, right? Lo and behold, if they don't get those like broken turn 3 kill kind of starts, you will just grind right through them because you have the early helixes, you've got the cornucopias, and typically the aggro lists don't have a lot of answers for artifacts in the main board right now. They're all focused on enchantments, they're focused on getting those temporary lockdowns out, and you still have those in the sideboard to bring in. But you also have these ill-timed explosions, which surprisingly has been one of the best wraths at 4 mana that I've yet played. And you've got the Sunfalls, you've got the cover-ups, and even if you don't get any of that, sometimes you just go turn 3 cornucopia, turn 4 Niv Mizzet, gain 5 life. Here's a 5/5 that you can't kill with Go for the Throat, or basically anything that they're going to be playing in aggro lists. It's just going to sit there as a 5/5 flyer and let you keep replaying things like ill-timed explosion. So, and Helix. I don't know. It's a lot more resilient to aggro than I thought it would be. It still gets rolled by the like nut draws, but so does everybody. You know what I mean? There's no way through that sometimes. So I'd mess around with that list. It looks fun.
Yeah, that card, Niv Mizzet, is well positioned right now. So if you can manage to play it, get it out there, and stick the landing, it's pretty darn cool. All right, let's talk about another deck that I would consider pretty darn cool, and we're not seeing enough of. Mono White Infect. So with all the aggro out there, why the hell not bring back toxic white aggro. Really, I like where this list is positioned. We've got we get to use the 4 copies of Lay Down Arms as removal. That's always great. We're seeing 2 copies of Get Lost, 2 copies of Destroy Evil for your lockdowns and your other pesky enchantments. We're also bringing back Ossification. That card used to see a ton of play, so that intrigues me to see 3 copies of that in here as well. 2 copies of White Sun's Twilight, one of the better board wipes that don't see enough play, especially for your grindier matchups. You can get a kill after a while with this card. We've got 1 copy of Expel the Interlopers. I assume this is kind of protection for all the mid-range go big lists that are out there. Very creative board wipe. I love where this is positioned. 3 copies of Caretaker's Talent and 2 Takazia's Welcomes in the main. I don't know. I think my opinion is this is too many card draw engines. I might scale that back a bit, but I like where both of these cards are positioned. Maybe picking one or the other, I'm unsure. I do like where Surge of Salvation, the sideboard, is positioned, considering that we're seeing a ton of red-based aggro right now.
Fair, and I get why they're playing Ossification and all the Caretakers and anything on the basis of we are going to play so many enchantments, there's no goddamn way you're going to answer them all. Like that's literally the way that deck is positioned. Is like, all right, we know you've got enchantment hate, but do you have all of the enchantment hate? You know, so I could appreciate the fact that they went that route. It's a spicy list. It's going to be interesting, but
that's fair. Just don't run into like mono green or Golgari, because they run that green season card, which you can just all enchantments gone. I've done that to someone.
Or fade into history. It's what we used to do to domain players, and man, that was brutal. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's going to bring us, folks, to our final segment, Ahead of the Curve. Now, I know we've talked about it a few times, but for those just tuning in, we use this segment to synthesize all of our analysis into 2 viable options for you to take to your next tournament this weekend. Now, Max, we looked at 13 archetypes tonight. What are you playing going into Week 7 of Bloomborough Standard?
So I'm circling back and going back to our first Ahead of the Curve segment and saying that I need to revisit Dimir Aggro. Let's take a look at this list. My particular build houses a couple of copies of Archfiend of the Dross, and I think that card is really good against the heavy aggro meta, the heavy token meta, so I have a couple of copies of that in here as well. There's a strong counterspell, Spell Stutter now, that this deck can take advantage of, especially with the fact that we're seeing 4 fairies in the 1-drop slot, 4 fairies in the 2-drop slot, so that really takes advantage of that card. And then the whole deck is really about card advantage. We've got Fairy Mastermind, Steam Core Scholar, which allows you to do some hand fixing, which I've flooded with this deck, and that card has helped me out a ton in those situations. Gix is in here, and then, of course, Aclazotz as well. Gotta love Aclazotz helping you grind. And then I also want to point out I'm using the Amonkhet suite, 3 copies of Amonkhet. We're seeing a lot of graveyard play. We're seeing Reanimator decks come back, so why not take advantage of that fact of what your opponent's doing with Invasion of Amonkhet. Sometimes you flip your own Sheldred, sometimes you flip your own Aclazotz, and that's a very advantageous situation to have happen. So those are the cards that I'm using in Dimir Aggro right now.
So you got kind of a Dimir Skies with a backdoor combo against the Reanimator list to just wreck them for being Reanimator. I love that. I love that. That's so spicy, Max. Alrighty, let's move on, and I'll tell you a little bit about Boros Mighty Mouse.
Ooh, this deck is hot.
All right, folks. So I am 16-4 with this list on the ladder in Diamond at the moment. It's boasting over a 70% win rate on the ladder. So the sideboard guide, for those of you who are members of Coffee and Grinders, it's there. I filled it out. I've been tuning it all week long. I think I've got the numbers down to a T at this point, and it's been proven out nicely. It only gets better with Duskmourn, guys. We're going to get Turn Inside Out. We're going to get Shard Mage's Rescue. And Shard Mage's Rescue in particular with this deck is going to be insane. Triggering Valiant on White Snakeskin Veil, is going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. Can you imagine how backbreaking it's going to be when somebody goes to go for the throat your Manifold Mouse or your Heartfire hero, and you just trigger Valiant on the hero and save it? Ooh. And now it's 3/3/4/4 swinging back at them with Double Strike the next turn because of the Manifold Mouse. For me, the point of this list is that I didn't want Slickshot. I thought the mouse combo was the best, and the spice was Inti. That was the card I actually ran up against when I was playing a different deck on the ladder, and I saw it and immediately went, oh, that'll work. Like, that's going to be the best version of this deck. Bet, let's do it right now, and immediately revamp the whole list. So try it. It's a lot of fun, guys.
Yeah, Inti's really cool. I forgot to mention Inti earlier when we were talking about Boros, but Yeah, that's a hand fixing, triggering, Valiant and Prowess. That's a pretty awesome little card. I like that tech. So that's it, folks. Another week in the books. Thank y'all for supporting us, and special shout out to our members who support the Rebellion, watching these videos all the way through. We really love you. We'll be back next week. More analysis.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Every single click helps. We appreciate the hell out of you for doing it. And until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep,
Resist.
resist.